Okay, in this third section of week 3, we will talk about what new food and new cooking methods were introduced during colonial period. During the colonial period, Japanese, but also Chinese and particularly Western cuisine and cooking method were introduced to the Koreans and began to spread to many Koreans. First of all, Western food was introduced since the end of the 19th century and is spread out to wider population, especially during the colonial period. For example, bread was available to Koreans, especially in big cities, cakes, beef steak, Western soup, and ice cream cookies, because they were already quite popular in Japan, and Japanese companies were producing them, and their branches were established in Korea. And also Japanese food, such as kamaboko fish cake. Well, this is like a artificial fish cakes were introduced, and green tea was, of course, Koreans knew green tea already, but it was not consumed widely. But during this period, because Japanese drink green tea every day, green tea became more widely spread out among Koreans as well. And not to mention Japanese sweets, mochi and other things, and also sweet azuki bean bread, danpapang, was introduced this period, and bingsu. Well, today Korea is famous for bingsu, like seolbing and so on, but actually that was introduced from Japan during this period as a shaved ice. That became very popular among Koreans. Interestingly, it was during this period, colonial period, as I will explain later, even Chinese food became popular in Korea. Like jjajangmyeon was invented at this time, and not to mention hotdog. Hotdog was available during the colonial period, but also japchae. Many people today forgot the origin of japchae, but japchae itself is a very Chinese food, but it has become typical Korean food, and even Chinese tourists, they want to have japchae in Korea. And japchae is made with 당면, and here the noodle, the name of the noodle, in English is a glass noodle made out of starch. And this 당면, the tang means China, of course. So jjajangmyeon, hotdog, japchae, and 당면, and gunmandu, and all fried dumpling, they were all introduced in this period of time. And so the most wealthy urban resident and also a lot of Korean students who went to Japan, they learned these foreign food in Japan, all in big cities in Korea where a lot of Japanese were residing. And already some cookbooks published in 1930s, in Korea, they were introducing Western, Japanese, and Chinese cuisine. There were 4 big department stores in Seoul, especially around Myeongdong, which was the center of a Japanese residential area. And these department stores were introducing Western, Japanese, and Korean food, which includes like full course Western meals, light Western meals, which Koreans call 경양식, and coffee from wondu coffee, as a matter of fact, not instant coffee, coffee from roasted beans, and also Japanese soba noodle, and so on. They were introduced and widely available for urbanites in Korean Peninsula. And among many things was the powdered baby formula and powdered milk. And here in this colonial period advertisement, that the canned milk is sold and it is fed by to babies. And because Koreans were not used to feed babies with milk powder like that, so the advertisement actually educates Korean mothers that the milk is healthier than mother's milk and so on, which is not probably true, but there's a commercial marketization of powdered milk produced in Japan. Among the many new food and culture introduced was drink, because interestingly, during Joseon Dynasty, ordinary Koreans, not wealthy landed Yangban class, they really didn't have much things to drink. There was no tea. Tea consumption was very much confined to Yangban class and the Buddhist monks often. But ordinary Koreans didn't have tea. They didn't drink tea. There was no tea culture. There was tea culture as a matter of fact, but especially after Im Jin-hwaeran or Hideyoshi's war in Korea, because Korea became so poor, they lost the tea drinking habit. So Koreans would drink mostly sungnyong, the boiled water poured into the bottom of the rice in kettle, and they would drink that. And so when Japanese companies brought interesting drinks from Japan and also from Western countries, they became rather popular. And ramune is one of the things. This is very old Japanese drink, and it is still available. It's quite popular in Japan even today. And also, new Japanese sake, the alcoholic drinks were introduced in addition to traditional Korean alcoholic drinks. As I said, some Chinese dishes introduced to Korea as well. And among them is jampong. Well, today, jampong is considered as a Korean food in Korean-style Chinese restaurant, but this was, as a matter of fact, introduced this time, not by Japanese, but by Chinese who came from Chinatown in Nagasaki. So in Japan, this chanpon is called Nagasaki chanpon, and now that came to Korea during colonial period by the Chinese immigrants in Japan who followed Japanese to Korea, and in Korean environment, they changed Nagasaki chanpong, which doesn't include any chili pepper, but now today Korean chanpong is full of hot chili. The new food that were introduced in Korea, not to mention udon, and now that is thick white noodle with noodle soup, was introduced as a Japanese food, but actually it originated from China. And also food like a tangsuyuk, they were also brought by these Chinese migrants in Japan who remigrate to Korea. As I said, this Nagasaki chanpon is an interesting case together with mentaiko. So now the image on the top, that's typical Nagasaki chanpon. Probably this one is soy sauce based, but it's not red, it's not hot, because Japanese normally don't like the hot taste even now. And when it reached Korea, it changed into very hot jampong as Koreans love today. And then, as I said, this mentaiko, which originated from Korean Myeongranjeot in East Coast and spread out to large cities where a lot of Japanese were residing, such as Incheon and particularly Busan. And now this food was brought by Japanese people to Japan, and it became so popular in Japan, and now Westerners think mentaiko is a Japanese food, even though it originated from Korea. And next session, we will talk about portable lunch and Korean food kimbap. All right, so that's the end of my lecture on the Korean food during colonial period. And now, in my lecture, did you feel anything interesting, or is there anything that we can discuss or ask a question?
Yeah, so when Professor introduced ramune, the Japanese soda, it reminded me of a 칠성 사이다.
칠성 사이다.
Yeah, the Korean version of soda. So different to Western countries such as the UK, to Koreans, cider is not an apple beverage, but a soda whose history dates back to 1905 in Incheon. So before I can explain the brief history of cider, I would like to point out how popular cider is in South Korea. So, well, for Koreans, we normally choose the beverage between Coke and cider when we eat several like greasy foods, like for example,
that's right.
The foods which contain a lot of oils. So, like for example, I reckon that Western people tend to drink Coke with pizza or other like fast food. So, on the other hand, for Koreans, we always tend to like choose between the options of cider and Coke. Yeah, so anyway, so let's briefly talk about the origins of cider. So there is a famous Korean phrase which we can translate into English like this. So even if we've got some cider by the Incheon shore, we need a cup to get
That's
it
right.
poured.
I heard it.
Yeah, it's very famous. So this is a famous praise of the cider sung by Korean comedian Seo Young-chun in the 1960s.
Yeah, that's right.
So cider itself refers to a carbonated soft drink and came to Korea through Incheon, so where it was produced for the first time as well. But according to the Incheon Busa, which is one of the history of Incheon region, in 1905, Masataro Hirayama, a Japanese business person, he established a company named Incheon Tansan, which means carbonic acid.
That's right.
And in May 1910, soon, another Japanese named Nakayama Unokichi opened a soda business in Incheon also, so which is the same place as the name of ramune factory. So after Korea's liberation from Japan's colonial rule in 1945, the company's successor, named as 경인 합동음료, produced star cider. Which is one of the origins of 칠성 cider. So it started to gain tremendous popularity among Koreans. So while it remains controversial regarding the origins of 경인 합동음료, some say that the company was established by taking over both Incheon Tansan and ramune factory.
I see.
So no matter what the truth is, the cider is one of the many other firsts in Incheon, and its origin is definitely related to the great influx of Japanese products like ramune, I guess.
I see.
So, of course, not every story is academically acknowledged, but I guess it is clear that Incheon is a place that cherishes the memory of the beginning of the modernization of Korea and Korean food, I guess.
Yes, exactly. Incheon's foreigners district, like Shanghai's Waitan,
Yeah, definitely.
it was the entry of many Western missionaries and travelers. So a lot of Western culture or Japanese Chinese culture came through it, and also the first Korean immigrants to Hawaii, they left from Incheon, and mostly around the Incheon area. And if you know the famous South Korean university, Inha University, that In and Ha is Incheon and Hawaii. So the migrants who came out of Incheon and who went to Hawaii to work in the sugarcane plantation, they donate money to establish that university. So definitely Incheon was the most important port in terms of foreign culture.
Yes, very interesting. Thank
Yes,
you.
Yeah. Okay, so that ends the third session, the week 3. And thank you for your listening. And we will see you again in our next session. Thank you.